Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, this is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is Coach's Corner. I'm here with Teresa Huff, and I really want to get this conversation started because she is a strategist. Now, I've talked to a lot of people who call themselves strategists in the past, but you do something really impactful, Teresa. What is that?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I am a nonprofit strategist, and more specifically, a nonprofit grant strategist. I work with nonprofits and grant writers to train them to be more impactful with their writing and to develop the skills they need to really make a big difference in their work and in their communities.
So I have a couple of people who run nonprofit organizations here on the East Coast. One, of course, locally to me in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and I know they're all over the place, and they're trying to make impact on their local communities. And what and that, we go. I think they go into that thinking that there's always going to be monies available for them, but I'm not sure if that's true. Is how true is that statement? Are there really lots of monies out there for nonprofits to make an impact on their local community?
There's a lot of money out there in the grant world, but it's usually pretty designated for specific areas and types of work. And it's usually more designed to supplement your programs that are already in place and already up and running, as opposed to, I have this great idea, let's go find a grant. Or, I want to build a new building for a brand new nonprofit, just get a grant for that. That's something I
So
hear a lot is, oh,
so
just get a grant.
that's not how it works then.
You don't just get a grant. You don't just whip up a brand new business. So with grants, it's more like you get your nonprofit up and running and stabilized, show that proof of concept that you have something worth investing in, and then the grant maker can come alongside you and be a part of the solution to help make a bigger impact in the community.
So there are lots of foundations out there, and this is just from my own research. Like, I want to get this one right: the Bill and Linda Gates Foundation and Ford, and I think there's lots of big names out there that seem to be like the go-tos. But is that true for foundations and those who give grant monies? Are there really go-to people that, regardless of the situation, will offer money as long as like you said, the proof of concept and the foundational elements are there? Or am I wrong in that thinking? Because I'm really curious.
The big foundations, like the ones you named, are pretty competitive and looking for highly stable, established nonprofits to work with. So if you're, a small local nonprofit that's kind of struggling and just serves a really specific niche in the community, they may not look at you. And so, for those types of nonprofits, if they're smaller, I recommend starting locally with local foundations that are in your community that are looking specifically to do work in the area around them, as opposed to trying to get the attention of someone
Bill and
at
Linda
one of those
Gates.
big foundation. Exactly. It's like if you and I wanted a bank loan, should we go to the president and try to get a loan, or should we go to the bank down the street and build a relationship with the banker where we can sit down with them, get to know them, talk to them about our situation, and find out about what kind of loan would be best for us? So, which one is more likely? Which one is going to actually build a relationship? Which one's going to get noticed?
That makes
And so I recommend building up from there.
I think that actually makes a lot of sense to me. Thinking about it is, having, you want to build local communities, you want to keep the money in local communities. So I guess it makes sense to find the money in local communities, at least to start with, and kind of, build that relationship, have that relationship, and know that where that money is coming from and how it's going to be delegated and used. Um, one of the questions that I always have is that there are foundations from corporations, and then there are government grants. Am I right? And
Yes, there are
are
different
there
types.
different types? Is one easier to acquire than the other, or does it make any difference?
Typically, smaller family foundations or local community foundations or some corporate foundations are much simpler, not always, but usually much simpler than government grants because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of registration, validation, paperwork, extra documentation that has to go along with the government grants and navigating the system. And plus, the requirements and the application process is pretty intense for government grants. So usually the foundation grants are much more manageable. And that's partly why I recommend those too if a nonprofit hasn't gotten grants before. The smaller grants and say building a relationship with a local community foundation is a great place to start because then for one you can learn the process when the stakes aren't quite so high, it's not such an intense workload, and it's not quite as competitive as the federal grants. So that lets you learn the process, but it allows your team also to develop systems, get things in place. How are we going to track this? How are we going to report it? Once the funding is awarded, if you are awarded that grant, then you're responsible to actually implement and track and document everything you've spent and follow up with reports to the funder. So it's important that you have those processes in place, and that's much easier to do and iterate and solidify with the smaller grants and a much smaller scale. And then you can leverage those to get larger and larger grants and show that you're building a track record of credibility. And hey, we have good management here, and other people think we're worth investing in as well. So, will you contribute to our cause? And that makes you a lot more credible than if you're starting with zero.
I like that. And I like the idea of you're constantly building credibility, starting small and then growing and getting bigger and bigger. When we last talked, not on record, you used the term ROI a bit differently than we typically hear about it, return on investment. But your ROI is what?
Return on impact,
Well, what does
right?
that mean? What does that mean exactly?
Mhm. I went through this in my TEDx talk actually and talked about how in the business world, of course, we know ROI, investors are looking for their return on investment. What are we going to get back out of this? But in the nonprofit world, a grant maker isn't looking to get their money back. It's a grant that's given, but they are looking at where can we maximize our impact in the community? Where can we get that biggest return on impact to be able to make the most difference? And grant makers typically focus on specific priorities. They have a mission of their own as well. And so for some, it may be cancer research. For others, it may be literacy or animals and environment, whatever the cause may be that is near and dear to their hearts. So the nonprofit needs to look for those foundations and funders that have a similar mission, that are looking to do similar work in the community. And the grant makers can't be on the front lines of every nonprofit doing the work themselves. That's why they're there making the grants. So they can help be an extension of that work and maximize that work in the community. And so, along with the return on impact, I go through the ROI framework in my talk of helping nonprofits develop their relevance, their optimization, and their interaction.
Wow.
And once you get
ROI.
all three of those, it's the ROI framework that leads to the ROI, the return on impact.
Wow.
And so that when you have all three of those, that's when you're the most successful. You can have two of the three and make some progress, but there's going to be something missing and just it's not quite going to click. But when you get all three locked in, really solid, then you can start really moving forward to get results.
Tell that to me again. What's the R?
R is relevance. So making sure your mission is relevant to the grant maker's mission, but also making sure your work is relevant in the community. What kind of statistics and data and stories and information is out there to support the need for this work that you're doing? Is it relevant?
Okay.
Then optimizing.
Okay.
Do you have optimized operations, your board? Are your staff and volunteers well trained? Do you have policies and procedures? Are you running smoothly? Just like a business should run smoothly and have good systems. Are you a legitimate, solid organization or are you a hot mess? So, how are you presenting that and how do you come across? And then on the I, are you interacting with authenticity and building those meaningful relationships in the community, whether it's with grant makers, with donors, with other nonprofits doing complementary work? How are you interacting and building those relationships before you need them for a grant? If we work on these three things well in advance, then when the grant opportunity comes along, we'll be ready. We don't have to worry about, oh no, we've got to scramble and find our bylaws. They're in a file cabinet somewhere, but you've got all that in place already.
Well, it sounds like that's the gold standard of how to really approach this whole grant writing or um what's the word I'm looking for? I guess relationship with the grant writer and the foundation. So is is that part of it? Do you actually we talked about, developing relationships earlier in the call. Do you do Should the nonprofit be looking to develop like relationships with found people who work in the foundations, or is that they just need to show that they align with their mission?
I recommend both. I
Okay.
recommend there's a person on the other side of everything we do. So we always need to be writing for the person and think about the person, not an ATM machine, but the actual people. Who's going to be reading this application? Who's going to be hearing our story and seeing the impact it's making? And so sometimes that means just picking up the phone and having a conversation with the usually very kind person on the other end that is also interested in this cause that you care about. And so, yeah, I strongly recommend building those relationships and getting to know them and letting them get to know you. And that just helps even more. I've seen it over time with my clients. It's been a tremendous aspect of often getting repeat funding year after year because they see the impact it's making. They've met the people, they've walked through the facility, they've been invited to come tour or to come visit an exercise class or whatever it is and be a part of it and see it firsthand. And they get excited too. They get to know them and the work, and they love being a part of that movement in the community.
Well, I think you're giving our audience a lot of good ideas and especially strategic ones to move forward with if they've never, or if their budget is low and they've kind of applied for local community funding. I think it gives them a better advantage. But I want to go back to something that you said earlier that piques my interest. You were on the TED stage. Is that
Yes,
am I
it
right? You
was.
were on the TED stage, right?
Yes, it was TEDx, which is those are independently
Okay,
organized
well, you were the TEDx
events,
stage. Okay.
right? But
So,
yes, I
and
was.
that's where you talked about return on impact?
Right. The
What,
real ROI of grant writing was the name of my talk.
cool. Can you share some of that experience with us?
About the talk.
Yeah, please.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I had met the organizer on an online call, and he reached out to me and he said, with your background and history with grant writing, you might have a TEDx talk in you. And I was like, what? That was not on my radar at all. But now I can check it off my bucket list when it wasn't even on there.
Cool.
But yay. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And I said, what date are you thinking? And he said, how does October 13th sound? And I looked at the calendar and that was 8 weeks out. I was like, do you mean this October or
October?
next year October? Wait, which October? And he was like, no, yeah, this year. Go ahead and book your flight. I was like,
Wow.
okay, we're doing this thing. So I had 8 weeks to figure out how to do a TEDx talk, what that really meant, and wrap my head around it, but then also refining what do I want to talk about and putting all the things together. Do I want to use slides or not, or just all the things? And I realized though, in the middle of it, like it made
In the middle of the
me
prep
have
or the
to
middle of the talk?
yes, in the preparation
Okay.
phase in that 8 weeks. Yeah,
Okay.
good question. In that phase, it helped me realize through the process that I already knew what I needed to say. Like it had been building for the last 20 years of my work with nonprofits, and it came from conversations and struggles and successes and all the parts and pieces and ups and downs. I already knew. I just needed to really sit down and flesh it out. And
Cool.
so I talked to people who had done TEDx talks. I, talked to different coaches and various friends and got input. But then finally it came to the point where, okay, I can keep reading all the books, but at some point I've got to actually get this thing out. So it just kept, I took all the advice, but then I kept coming back to what really bugs me about this. What do I really want to say? What thing keeps coming up that just, I want to get it out there. And it just came back to this really wanting people to understand you don't just get a grant for that. It's like saying, "Oh, just run a marathon Saturday. You'll be fine. Just get some new shoes." Like a pair of new shoes is not going to make you ready for a marathon by Saturday. And so that's what it came down to. Like, I need to somehow convey this. And so then in just brainstorming and working through different ideas, then I tried to quantify it somehow. And it came down to that ROI. And let's define this and let's
Oh, so it
give
was
people that picture and the visual.
the ROI idea, the ROI model is then relatively new. Is
I mean, as
I mean
of
you
what date was my talk? October 2022. Yeah,
so 20 years of experience brings you to this and you create so if you've got a model, do you have a book?
it's actually in progress. Yes.
Okay.
And by hopefully by the time the podcast airs, I don't know how far out you are, but this spring is my goal that I am cranking it out.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. So got to keep up with good authors like yourself.
Well, I appreciate that. So last question. Are you going back on the TED? Are you going to go back? If you can, if you had the
Possibly.
opportunity?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. I
If
like
I
that.
had the opportunity, I would. And there's already one or two concepts really bugging me again that I'm like, okay, that would be the next talk. So yeah, I absolutely I would recommend if someone ever gets the chance, take it seriously and go all in, embrace the opportunity and just go for it and do it. And so yeah, I just had to lean in like, okay, I can't let fear get the best of me. I have to just go all in and do this thing, and I am so thankful for it. And I was surprised at how much it changed me, not just my work, but also helped me realize, okay, I can do things and I can do hard things and I have things to say and it's worthwhile. And, over time, it's just strange, like having to get out of your own way
Mhm.
sometimes and do things that you didn't expect, but then realizing, oh, okay, there was someone here that I hadn't met yet, maybe. And so then it's like leaving version 2.0 of yourself behind and moving into 3.0 and just keep upgrading a bit.
I like that. That sounds awesome. Where can people find you on the web? Where are you?
I am most active on LinkedIn, just Teresa Huff there, or Grant Writing Simplified on LinkedIn. And of course, the Grant Writing Simplified podcast, or the TEDx talk is on YouTube. And they're also welcome to email info@teresahuff.com.
I will have all that contact information, especially your TED Talk, TEDx Talk, in the description of the video. Teresa, any last words for those who are needing or wanting a grant? What would be the first thing that you would want to tell them, given all your ROI and the necessary model for impact? What's the first step?
I often say action brings clarity. And I know that a lot of times grant writing and just the world of grants can be overwhelming. And for me, it's easy to get caught up in that thinking and researching and overthinking stage, and then you get paralyzed and don't do anything. So, absolutely build your ROI, work on the relevance, the optimization, the interaction, but then make sure you do something to take action every single day, whether it's researching a grant, picking up the phone and calling the funder, whatever it is, take action. And then action will help bring more clarity. It brings more data, which helps you take better, more focused action. And it creates a cycle of improvement. But you've got to get that momentum started.
I think that's the best business advice anybody has ever said on this conversation. Teresa, thank you so much for this conversation. For those of you who are watching and listening, we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.